Hey everybody, it's Joel Lewis, and we're back. We're going to do another Bible study. This time, we're going to start studying the book of Exodus. We're going to start in chapter 1, and I'm not going to worry about time constraints or anything like that, because studying the Bible is important. Getting the facts are important. Understanding your relationship, help understanding the book of Exodus will help your relationship with God. So let's dive into it. Let's get into chapter 1. Now, I like to read from the Tree of Life version. You can use whatever version you're most comfortable with. We're going to start in Exodus 1:1. Now, these are the names of the children of Israel who came into Egypt with Jacob, each man with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah; Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin; Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The souls that came out of the line of Jacob numbered 70 in all, while Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, as did all his brothers and that generation. The children of Israel were fruitful, increased abundantly, multiplied, and grew extremely numerous, so the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the people of children of Israel are too numerous and too powerful for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or else they will grow even more numerous, so that if war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and then escape from the land." So they set slave masters over them to afflict them and forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramesses as storage cities for Pharaoh. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread. So the Egyptians dreaded the presence of the children of Israel. They worked them harshly, and made their lives bitter with hard labor, with mortar and brick, doing all sorts of work in the fields. In all their labors they worked them with cruelty. Moreover, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whose name was Shiphrah, and the other was Puah, and said to them, "When you help the Hebrew women during childbirth, look at the sex. If it's a son, then kill him, but if it's a daughter, she may live." Yet the midwives feared God, so they did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt was summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this? Let the boys live." The midwives told Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are like animals and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied, growing very numerous. Because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. But Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, "You are to cast every son that is born into the river, but let every daughter live." So that is chapter 1, 1 through 22. Now I'm going to go into some in-depth history. Um, you can look this up. It's called Torah Class with Tom Bradford. He has a lot of historical um, teachings on on each chapter of the book of Exodus. Um, it's been told that it says that there were a total of 70 people that came with Jacob. Here's the thing, we're going to get many symbolic numbers. In the Bible as a whole, 70 is a symbolic number. Now, on one hand, Genesis 46, which lists all the male descendants of Jacob by means of both his legal wives and his concubines, gives us the count of 70. However, as we discussed when we studied that chapter, the number presents problems because it includes two of Judah's sons who died at the hand of God in Canaan, as well as Joseph and his two sons who were born in Egypt. So 70 males of Jacob's family could well be accurate, but on the other hand, 70 is such a round number and such a symbolic number that indicates totality or something that is fully comprehensive, that we have to likely view this number of 70 as symbolic, that all of Israel went to Egypt with no one left behind. Now, this number 70 only counts males. There were at least as many females, and usually there were significantly more females than males in ancient populations because the men were either killed in battle or injured on their jobs. So, therefore, the actual total number of people who went down to Egypt, those who would be reasonably labeled as Israelites, were probably around 200 or so. So the bulk of the Israelites still lived now some 350 years after their arrival in the same general area that they did when Joseph called for them. So Goshen in the Nile Delta area, the central city they lived in, was called Avaris, Avaris. And Joseph appears to have been, it, it, it's been told that he had his own place there for him and his immediate family, even though he may have lived at the palace. He had a dwelling within the city of Avaris. This city has been found, and there can be no doubt as to the identity in archaeological terms. This place is now called Tel Ad Da'aba. So it's called Tel Ad Da'aba. I'm not fluent in Hebrew or, words of Hebrew, so I'm reading this and I'm doing, you know, It's TEL space ED dash DA dash ABA. That is the name of That's what avarice is now called. It's huge and it would have supported hundreds of thousands of people. And it was Hebrew and Canaanite in architecture. Now we're going to go into a little bit of study about the different opinions and the different ways that people, archaeologists, Christian and non-Christian, have studied this or have come across this city. Archaeolog- Archaeological finds have confirmed that it was in the land of Goshen, also called Lower Egypt, where the Hyksos rulers of Egypt set up their capital city. And not surprisingly, it was this same city, Avaris. Now, a common refrain from non-Christian and university professors is that the Bible is simply a book full of legends and myths. The people and places in the scriptures, for the most part, never existed. We are told that they never found this place in Egypt. There was never any place big enough where Hebrews might have lived. We're told that they've never found records of Solomon or King David, nor of most of the biblical cities. This is nonsense. They have found these sites, and they have found the records. And when push comes to shove, it's admitted. The only reason that many archaeologists and Egyptologists will argue against the conclusion that tells that Avaris even existed or is the city of the Exodus is because they date Avaris to an earlier time than the Bible chronology says, and Hebrews should have lived there. And it's a matter of placing these archaeological sites in relation to the time that is the issue. Now we're going to go into a little bit about the dating methods of this. The current system of dating ancient places and times and events established in the 1800s is called regional dating system or regional dating system. It's based on the supposed times of the reigns of the certain pharaohs. It is a system that is full of huge time gaps, pure speculation, and educated guesses. But more, some of the foundational pillars of regional dating have, through modern research, proven to be false. There's a new dating system called the New Chronology dating system, and it's gaining mainstream academic support slowly but surely. And when the new chronology is applied to the finds of avarice and to hundreds and hundreds of other biblical sites, the biblical timeline falls almost perfectly into place. I do detour a little to tell you this because I want you to know that when we're reading Exodus, these peoples and places actually existed and the events happened. Many proofs have been found, and more are constantly being unearthed. So, if you look at verse 6, we're told that Joseph died, and along with him that generation. That is, all of his brothers and sisters So we need to picture that generation as the immigrant generation. Think for a moment just what that means. Practically every one of us in in this study are natural born Americans. However, our parents or grandparents were probably immigrants. I really don't know that about me because I'm Native American. Um, I don't really know my parents. I've never met them, so I was not, I don't know anything about my family history. I know that my dad was full-blooded American, Native American, from a tribe somewhere in New York. And my mom was probably European. So I do have probably some immigrants in my family tree. Um, so our parents and grandparents were probably immigrants. They came here from someplace else to start a new life. And their experience in America as immigrants who just got off the boat was quite different than for those of us whom they produced. What God through Joseph had begun, Joseph's death did not end. Verse 7 says that even after Joseph died, the Israelites continued to prosper and grow in number and spread out exceedingly. Yet it was this very purpose of God, this amazing fulfillment, that was going to lead Israel into confrontation with a future Pharaoh, an increasingly paranoid Pharaoh. The Hycosis rulers, those Semites from somewhere in the Middle East who were the rulers of Egypt during the time a little before contemporary with, and then for about a century after Joseph, continued to favor the Israelites. After all, they were cousins. While this invaluable status of the Hebrews allowed them to grow and prosper, it was also creating a festering jealousy and hatred of them by the Egyptians. The end of verse 7 marks the end of life in Egypt as the Israelites had known it. The end of verse 7 is the end of Israel's golden era in Egypt. Now, before we move on to the next era of Hebrews in the time of Egypt, this might be a good time to take a magnifying glass and look at how Israel was currently structured from a human society standpoint. Because beginning now in Exodus and running throughout the remainder of the Old Testament, it is assumed that we understand ancient Hebrew societal structure. Even if we don't, we're going to get lost. So, with apologies to you that may already know, for everyone else, we're going to take a few minutes to learn about the titles for leadership positions and names for the various subdivisions of the Hebrew people that came from this population explosion. And if we can learn what they are each referring to, we'll glean something extra understanding each time these terms are used in our studies. Let's remember that the nation of Israel was founded by and named after Jacob. God renamed him Israel. In those days, the name of a new nation, which is nothing more than a new people group, was taken from its founder. Jacob went on to have 12 sons, who formed the first subdivision of Israel. Each of the sons would eventually establish their own tribe, their own branch of Israel. And, of course, each son would be the ruler of that branch, that tribe. These 12 tribes then each produced children, who were the next subdivision, and that next subdivision is what the Bible generally refers to as clans or families. And as each of the clans or families went on to produce children, those children would mature and produce the next generation or subdivision that the Bible calls households. In more familiar Western terminology, Jacob was the father, the 12 sons, the children, their children, the grandchildren, and their children, the great-grandchildren. But the Bible uses different terms for each of these generations. So Israel was the nation, the 12 sons, the 12 tribes that formed the nation. The sons of the 12 tribal leaders each formed their own clan or family. While the Bible translators tend to use clan and family interchangeably, most accurately for our 21st century Western way of thinking, it would be best to think of these clans and families as just clans and use the word family for another category. So out of these households, which we could best equate in our traditional thinking as extended families, came what the Bible sometimes calls man by man. This is not talking about eligible bachelors. Rather, this would be the equivalent of our modern day nuclear family, the smallest family unit. That is, mother, father, young children as a unit. Often the Bible translators will call the man by man subdivision a family. But this must not be confused with when the same Bible translators will also call a clan a family. So the structure of Israel is nation, all of Israel, tribe, 12 of them, clan, household, man by man, family. The Bible calls the leader of the household the head, though sometimes he is referred to as the chief. The leader of each clan is the chief. The leader of a tribe is called a prince. So each of the 12 tribes of Israel had a prince. As long as there still existed 12 tribes, there were 12 princes. Now, these princes were the rulers over all the people of their tribe, every subdivision, every clan, household, and family was ultimately behold to the tribal prince. His word was law. Let's keep in mind a trait of these tribal princes that, through obvious on the surface, is nonetheless important. These princes inherited their positions. Their heredity was what counted, while an outsider, whether from another of the Israel tribes or a foreigner or a non-Hebrew could at times be accepted as a member of a tribe, this outsider would never be allowed to be a prince because proper ge- ge- absolute proper genealogy traceable not just back to Jacob, but to the proper original son of Jacob. That is, the proper tribe was required. So the order of prince, chief, head formed a hereditary aristocracy. Aristoc- aristocracy. I don't know how to say that word. If that is when it came to authority, it was the old TV series was called It's All in the Family. Now, interestingly, operating in parallel was another class of category of leadership and authority, a sort of elected, appointed class of leaders. And the class of leaders were representatives of the common people of the clans and the families and the households. And they were called elders and officers. Often a word substituted for officer is scribe. Now, this class of appointed or elected leaders operated under the authority of the tribal leaders. There is absolutely no way, for instance, that you would ever remove a prince or a chief from his position, except perhaps through assassination. His position was given to him as a birthright, and there it was unchangeable and permanent. But elders and officers or scribes could be removed legitimately from their position if there was enough displeasure on the part of the people of whom they were selected to serve, or if they upset the tribal leadership sufficiently. And of course, elders and officers and scribes developed their own pecking order. They were further subdivided by their exact duties and simple management hierarchy, like we're all used to seeing at wherever it is we work. You know, little fish reporting to big fish, and big fish reporting to bigger fish. So, verse 7 ends with, and verse 8 begins a new and far less happy era for the Israelites in Egypt. We're told that a new king, that is, a new Pharaoh, arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Simply, this meant that the new king had no intentions of honoring the deeds that the previous kings or pharaohs had with the Israelites. And this for one very good reason. This new king was an Egyptian, the first Egyptian ruler of Egypt in a very long time. This new Egyptian pharaoh promptly announces that the Israelites, who had been honorable and worthy citizens of Egypt for nearing 200 years, are suddenly a danger to Egypt. And they're a danger because there are many more of them. In other words, the pharaoh played the race card, since those hated Hyksos rulers were Middle Eastern Semites and seen as cousins of essentially the same stock as the Hebrews. They were all lumped together in one big pot. Now, that the Hyksos rulers were defeated, those who supposed those who supported those rulers and probably looked a lot like those rulers, the Israelites, became persona non grata, and they would bear the brunt of Egypt's newfound nationalism and paranoia. So, are we to take that the Hebrews at this point actually outnumbered the Egyptians, which the Pharaoh says they did in verse 9? Or was the Pharaoh exaggerating? It's sort of yes and yes. The Israelites were numerous and lived throughout Egypt. They were highly concentrated in Goshen and would have well outnumbered the Egyptian nations. Sorry. They would have outnumbered the Egyptian nationals, but when considering Egypt overall, best estimates are that the Israelites would not have represented more than about 25% of the entire population of Israel or of Egypt. But that's still pretty substantial. It is not ironic and completely indicative of the ongoing battle between God and Satan that what God counted as blessing, the incredible fruitfulness of Israel, Pharaoh counted as a curse. And so the confrontation between good and evil begins. Pharaoh's in a bind. He hates the Israelites. He fears the Israelites, but he needs the Israelites. He needs them as a workforce. And what do we call that? We call that slavery. They are the key to Egyptian economy and the hoped return of Egypt to the position of being a regional power. The solution? Subjugation. Control them. Use them for what they're good for. Keep the population in check and don't let them leave. In other words, again, slavery. Now, don't get the idea that Egyptian population began taking Hebrews as house slaves. Rather, it was that the Egyptian government conscripted the Israelite males as a workforce for their building projects. It was rather like being drafted into the army, except there was no pay. And in fact, what Egypt did was to conscript Egyptian males in order to create a loyal nationalist military to protect the nation from invasion. At the same time was the bothersome Hebrew males as the nation's civilian labor force. Interestingly, there is no evidence that Israelite women were included in this slave labor scheme because the work that was required was male work. Making mud bricks, then constructing houses and buildings, also constructing and maintaining a vast network of canals and water reservoirs, building roads and military fortresses. The Hebrews became the primary group of construction labor in Egypt, and their lives became miserable as the result. Excuse me. Now, to the degree the new king of Egypt planned, it worked. The construction projects brought the country back to glory, and the enslavement of the Israelites controlled their movement. But another aspect of his plan failed. Rather than reducing the Israelite population, the more he oppressed the Israelites, the more these children of Israel, Hebrews, produced. And the more children the Israelites produced, the more paranoid it made the Pharaoh and his cohorts. And here we see one of God's patterns emerge that will continue until Jesus comes again. The more you persecute God's people, the more fruitful they will become. Israel never grew more faster, and the church never grew more and faster than when under the worst persecution. If Israel had just given up and decided to fully assimilate into the Egyptian society, they may have avoided persecution, but they would have foregone fruitfulness. As long as the church continues to take the easy road to look more and more like the world, so we avoid persecution for our identity with Yeshua or Jesus, as some call, the less fruitful we'll be. So it has been, and so it will forever be. It's simply the way God's economy works, and we have no ability to alter it. So this Pharaoh was worried and frustrated that he did something so desperate, something that in some ways would be counter to his grand purposes. He ordered those who the Bible calls the midwives of the Hebrews. The plan was that the infant they assisted into the world, if it was a boy, they were to immediately kill it. If it was a girl, they could let it live. Yet Pharaoh had actually succeeded in this infanticide. He would only have reduced the available workforce available for his aggressive construction. His plan didn't work. These midwives who knew and feared the Hebrew God didn't obey Pharaoh. What we essentially have here is the first recorded instance in the Bible of civil disobedience in order to obey God. To obey God's morals and ethics, which often are in opposition to man's morals and ethics. And this rather brave defiance was conducted by women. Two women. Two women who are named here as midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. Without doubt, they must have been something like the senior midwives, in charge of many more midwives, because two would have never been enough to handle the hundreds of daily births taking place among the Israelites all over Egypt. Being a midwife was one of the few professions open to women in that era. It was respected and valued as much as it was needed. A midwife primarily was there to assist the woman in her labor, to cut the umbilical cord, to wash the newborn and rub it down with salt. And in case of twins, it was the midwife who would testify as to which one was born first, naturally. Which of the set of male twins came out first was more important because that one would usually receive the firstborn blessing, while the second to arrive did not. So midwives were held in high esteem, and their function was very vital. Midwifery, as I'll call it, was also quite organized, and the midwives were paid by those whom they served. There was a midwife guild, and probably Shifra and Pua were the head of that guild, which is why Pharaoh specifically summoned those two. Excuse me. As an interesting side note, many Bible scholars doubt that these midwives were Hebrews. The Hebrew wording of the sentence is a little ambiguous in that regard because the words can be taken to mean Hebrew midwives or midwives of the Hebrews. But this conclusion is drawn for a couple of reasons. First, it is unimaginable that the Pharaoh would have been so dumb as to honestly expect Hebrew midwives to kill their fellow Hebrew newborns. Second, these women in verse 19 obviously knew something about how Egyptian women experienced the birthing process, as they comment that Hebrew women give birth faster than Egyptian women. Since Egyptians at that time wanted nothing to do with the Hebrews, it's hard to imagine that Hebrew women being the midwives employed to help an Egyptian mother give birth. Very probably Shifra and Pua were Semite women, but not Hebrews. In fact, their names are obviously Semite in origin, but they were not Hebrew names. We should also take note here that in spite of the distinctly male-oriented world of tribal society, the Bible makes these two women into honored heroines. We will often see in the Bible how women are painted as used of God and venerated by the people. In fact, as we approach the story of Moses, women will become some of the main characters. I've often said that I think that women back then were more respected than people here in the 21st century give them credit for. I often hear Christians say that women back then were subjugated, they were not treated as equals, they were treated more like slaves. But when I read the Bible, I do read some of that, but I also read where the men listen to the women. You look at Abraham and Sarah. You look at Adam and Eve. I mean, Adam took the fruit from Eve. you know? Um, Abraham, listened to Sarah, his wife, when, you know, she told him to sleep with her maidservant. I mean, women in the Bible they were not weak as we generally see them. So, while having failed and still unable to stem the Hebrew population increase, Pharaoh turns to the Egyptian population and tells them to monitor the situation because these midwives just didn't listen. They were not going to disobey God. So apparently they knew God. So when that doesn't work, he tells his people, the Egyptian, population, when they see a Hebrew woman about to give birth, it is their responsibility to do something about it. So the average Egyptian didn't take this infant from its mother and destroy it any more than the average German in World War II would have wandered around killing Jews. Rather, they would have reported it to the government authorities that had people assigned to come and take the newborn if it was a male and throw it to its death into the waters of the Great Nile River. Now, the Nile River has what we call Nile gators or Nile crocodiles. So you can imagine what happened when they threw these babies. If they didn't drown, they got eaten. This irrational fear at it this is Pharaoh. This is irrational fear at its worst. There's no record of Israel ever trying to take over the government of Egypt, or rebelling, or even conniving with state enemies. Pharaoh's actions could do nothing but harm Egypt's ability to carry through with its ambitions, but it won't last, and it won't be the last time Israel is in some bizarre way blamed for a nation's problems and pays the enormous price of in blood for that paranoia. In fact, behavior toward the Jewish people will become a pattern throughout history and right up to our day. So, one more thing, and then we'll end the first chapter of Exodus. There are Hebrew word patterns, and they recur in various forms throughout Exodus. We will run into one of them right here in Exodus 1, and the word is serve. However, our English translations mask this recurrence by translating the same basic Hebrew word several different ways. Look at verses 13 and 14. Most of our Bibles will say something to the effect of making the Israelites do hard labor, work imposed on them, rigorous labors. Usually the English word chosen in this section of Exodus is labor. Well, the original Hebrew root word is abad, A-B-A-D. Various forms of abad were used 5 times in verses 13 and 14. So if we took these verses in their most literal Hebrewic sense, bringing with it the Hebrew word style and intent to make a point by the repetitive use of the Hebrew word abad, it would read like this. So they, Egypt, made the children of Israel subservient with crushing labor. They embittered their lives with hard servitude in brick and mortar and with all kinds of servitude in the field. All their service in which they made them subservient with crushing labor. When this Hebrew word pattern is uncovered, we can see an important spiritual principle emerge that is otherwise obscured, and it is this: whom you serve determines the nature of that service. Excuse me. When we serve God, all of our service is voluntary to Him. It is positive, good, lovely, and has an eternal quality of truth and light. When we serve Satan, in this case through Pharaoh, but more often it's serving ourselves, our own desires. And what we are participating in is servitude, forced, negative, evil, unfruitful, and whatever is produced from it will burn up right along with everything else that this world. I don't think I said that right. So whatever is produced from all that negative, evil, unfruitful servitude, it will burn up right along with everything else about this world at the end of days. At this point, verse 13 and 14 in Exodus, we only see the negative side of serve. A little later, we will see the positive side of serve, but it's much harder to even pick up this much intentional wordplay with the English translation. So that is the end of chapter 1. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it was, I hope you were able to learn. I know I went into a lot of historical things and side notes, but I feel like it's important for us to know these things because we don't teach a lot of this stuff in our everyday churches. We just skim the surface. And what we need to do is we need to dig down, we need to study, and we need to dive into, because that's the only way we're going to know what the text really means. Let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. And thank you for what we get out from it, Lord. Lord, we have come to see that we are now in the time of Israel's life generation where they are being persecuted and yet still prospering. We're seeing what we call the great controversy between good and evil. the war between good and evil is unfolding right here in Genesis 1. I mean, not Genesis 1, Exodus 1. Sorry. Lord, you prospered Israel. They were faithful to you, and even through times of persecution, even through times of slavery, you prospered them. Lord, may we as a church, and I'm not talking about buildings or denominations, I'm talking about us as a people. May we keep the faith that even when we are persecuted, you will prosper us, Lord. You will bless us. I thank you for this chapter, Lord. I thank you for the opportunity to share your word and to study. Be with us through the rest of our day. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, everybody. I hope you have a great day. I thank you for watching this. And again, if you want to do a further study, um, you can go to different. Um, I have several different commentaries I use. I use Tom Bradford's, um, which today I use most of that. Tom Bradford's Torah Talk. You can go on his website. You can download the transcript of his commentary. I also like to use David. I can't say his last name. David Guzik. Um, he has a expanded library of commentaries on each book of the Bible. So you can also go to him. His name is David Guzik, Guzik. So those are just a couple. Adam Clark, Chuck Smith, um, Matthew Henry. I use some of those. I look in some of those. But anyway, I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you for chapter 2. Have a good day. And remember, God loves you.